Let's Talk JMMA with Charlie Jewett from sogo-kaku.com. This is a podcast about the deep end of the Japanese combat sports scene. I'm your host, Shu Hirata from On the Road Management. Now, let's begin. Hey, good morning, Charlie.
Good morning. How are you?
Very good. How are you?
Good. How's the bigger family doing?
Oh, well, my new son wakes up like every 2 hours during the night and sleeps very well during the day. So that's kind of crazy, right?
You got to like reverse train that.
Oh, I know. Anyway, so I want to dive right into this subject right here, which is our favorite fighter of all of the world, Rin Nakai, finally fights and wins in heat. And
now, I want to correct you there.
Of course,
the fight. I want to correct you there. The fight had no winner.
Oh yeah, that's true.
It was an exhibition match. So like, it's even weird to talk about because you're like, all you can say is like Rin Nakai had a match this weekend.
Right. The first round was the kickboxing rules bout, and according to this article on the Gong magazine, it was even round on the first. And the second round was under the MMA rules, so she took her down immediately and finished her with the ground and pound.
Yeah, that's what I was reading as well. She just took her down immediately. And, I mean, would it have ended any other way? I feel like these mixed rules bouts always favor the MMA fighter.
Always
just has to wait till the MMA round.
Yeah, exactly. Except remember when Jian fought Shinya Aoki, right, in Dream.
Well, that was like the greatest mixed rule bout ever. That's just because Aoki was so overconfident. He didn't even set up the takedown.
Right, and also he was very creative in the first round when they did the kickboxing rules bout, almost like a pro wrestler did, right?
Yeah, it was very pro wrestling.
Yeah, so it was
Rin
Nakai,
Rin Nakai looks so ripped in these pictures.
Yeah, she does. She looks really ripped.
There we go. Both their arms being raised. No winner, no loser.
Yeah, that's true. So I think this is nothing going. It's not going to help Rin Nakai's career. And
all it does is create attention, but she could have created attention without doing this. I feel like.
Yeah, I guess
she could have created more attention by having an actual fight.
I would love to have her coach or management in our show and interview them and see what they're thinking.
Well, it makes no sense because in the short term, it's like, yeah, she's going to be in Gonkaku. She's going to be in some news articles.
Mm-hmm.
But in the long term, it's like, this wasn't a fight.
Right.
It's an exhibition match.
I mean, I guess it only gave her a little bit of experience to be under the spotlight once again, fighting in the public, under the public eyes. That's about it.
That's a good point. She hasn't fought in a while, so maybe this was just her wanting to knock some rust off and see if she could murder a kickboxer.
And obviously, I think she should still try to talk to RIZIN and try to fight for the New Year's Eve show. Obviously, they want to do something big,
Or get on like one of those, now that RIZIN's branching out and doing all these like themed shows.
Right, exactly.
Why not just get on one of those?
She could be one of those too. She could be actually perfect for like a Landmark show, right? For the pay-per-view only.
Especially since Landmark can get away with announcing their cards quite late.
Mm-hmm.
Because the whole secretive angle. I mean, if she wants to only accept fights on 2 weeks' notice, I mean, that would be kind of the perfect opportunity.
Right. Now, since we mentioned heat, I actually like to mention this one guy. Did you notice this guy named Igor Tanabe, who made a MMA debut in heat?
No, I didn't.
No gi and gi, actually a world champion. He fought in quintet and everything else. And a lot of people are thinking highly of him,
Interesting.
And he's 21 years old, Brazilian, and raised in Mie Prefecture. And already a father. So hopefully he's a very responsible adult, right?
He's motivated to make some money.
Yeah, exactly. And, he fought nobody, of course, because it was his debut fight, but he finished in 57 seconds by a triangle. And he's a middleweight. He's 85 kilo.
Interesting.
So, yeah, this guy could be somebody kind of interesting, So I think we should keep an eye on this kid because he is actually sponsored by Igloo. and he belongs to the team called Igloo, and it's the company who is actually starting that show Unrivaled. You know that, right? The grappling show. Yeah,
Yes.
Mizugaki's competing, everything else. So he's actually supported by the right group of people in terms of money and the connections and everything else. I don't know about the training environment and everything else, but so this kid is somebody to watch, I think.
And how do these people get signed to Heat? Is it the idea that Heat does shows out in Nagoya so they can kind of take advantage of the local talent out there, or
That too, but not necessary though, right? Because Igor Tanabe lives in Tokyo,
okay,
right now, and Rin Nakai lives in Shikoku, which is still far from
anything
yeah,
far from anything?
Nagoya or anywhere that the Heat does where the show is. So, but I think Heat is so called. They're not like it used to be considered underneath the deep Pancrase and Shuto, but they have their own place in the industry right now in a way, right? They're
Right.
sort of the biggest out of the quote unquote independent local promotion, and
Well,
they
if
have.
they're going to do shows out in the countryside, that's like a. I mean, Deep goes to Osaka a couple times a year, but they don't
Mhm.
go anywhere else really.
Right. And I don't know if you have ever been to heat shows, but every time I go to heat shows, either during the intermissions and also at the beginning, also at the end, they put the name of the sponsors on the screen, and
Hmm.
it goes like miles and miles. So they have so many local sponsors on every show, and as you
That's how
can
they can
see,
afford to bring all these fighters in.
exactly. And back then, actually, the very first show I went is way back in like maybe 2006, seven. Back there, I brought two fighters from America, and one of the guy fought Hatsu Hioki.
Oh
You know,
wow!
and actually Brian Garrity, which is an ex-WEC fighter from Strasser's academy, and stuff like that. And they have been booking fighters like Strasser Kiichi to fight the Brazilians and Satoshi Ishii, right?
Hmm.
So I think they got some budget to be able to
Yeah,
attract type of fighters.
but weren't there rumors that Ishii was complaining about the money or
Yeah,
something?
of course, right. I mean, yeah. I mean, compared to what he used to get, of course, I mean,
But he's kind of stupid. So I mean, he's gonna burn bridges as he burns bridges.
yeah, I know. I mean, but again, I kind of respect Ishii for like being so active all over the place, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
well, K1 now.
yeah, and he won that fight too, and
Yeah,
actually K1 must have paid him relatively well,
right.
yeah, because they understand his value and everything
Yep.
else.
Still got a
Mhm.
name.
Right now, let's talk about that. The biggest news of Japanese MMA on this week has to be the RIZIN Trigger show. No, like it's even it's
JMMA fans around the world cringe at the
right.
idea of a caged
Yeah,
Ryzen show.
exactly right. Finally, this week, the Rising announced the Okinawa shows. But at the same time, they announced this new series called Rising Trigger Show, which is
Right,
their first cage shows. So now they
right.
have a landmark show and trigger shows, and also the regular Rising show. And they're planning on doing this trigger show maybe what 5 times a year.
Right.
Yeah.
And what the theme of it was to have developing fighters and
Hmm.
fighters past their prime.
Yeah.
So like
Or
kind of a
person who
place
has
for
to make
old
a comeback,
veterans.
right? Basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Hmm. So
And
veterans and up and comers.
right, veterans, up and comers, and onto the not to the major city, right? They're willing to go to the small town, basically,
Right.
right? And I think they're thinking about putting a shows in a venue around 5,000 people, you know. So I honestly think after the landmark shows, I think the rumor circulated that they sold about 80,000 pay-per-view,
Yeah.
which sounds like it's not so huge compared to the United States, right? But it's actually pretty good for the first time,
Well,
in
also
the United.
considering the number of fights that were on it.
Right, 4 fights only.
Yeah.
So,
Fourth that. So I mean, that's pretty good for the amount of budget they put in there. Plus, I
right.
mean, they made a killing on the limited ticket sales they had.
Oh, I know. So I figure. So they're thinking about landmark, and there's a trigger, which is sort of like a between the regular Rising and landmark,
Mhm.
right? So more pay per view oriented, but still 5,000 people, you know.
So
So so all of a sudden, Rising has maybe like 20 dates on year 2021. I mean,
uh,
2022.
that's something I wanted to ask you because
Mm-hmm.
I'm starting to get the feeling my wife, who's like a diehard Rising fan, and her friends, there's like maybe a feeling of like oversaturation now,
Yeah.
where they were saying that like Rising shows used to be like these special events where like all there's a bunch of good fights on it, I think they're more talking about the upcoming Yokohama card, which
Yes.
is kind of weak, and they're just like, I mean, it's in Yokohama. They live in Yokohama, and they're all like, maybe we'll just all get together and buy the pay-per-view
Right,
because
exactly. So
because
yeah.
even though like Corona restrictions are being lifted, Rising is still charging the pandemic prices. And so it's
Well,
like the cheapest ticket to that show is $100.
sure.
And
But here's what it is. I really think, this is not what I confirmed or anything like that with that Rising, but I think Rising is hoping the travel ban will be lifted by like
right,
maybe November. So
mhm,
by even New Year's Eve, or definitely by next year, they could start bringing a lot of foreign fighters.
right,
And actually, you know what? Here's what it is. For example, let's look at the show like Combate America. They does shows every week, and I
right.
hate to tell you this bunch of fighters was just not that good. I've seen
Right.
girl who has a record like 0-2 fighting that show and making like 750 kind of stuff.
Well, they're just trying to like, aren't they trying to rehab a bunch of kind of like Invicta washouts and things
Yeah,
like
that
that?
too, right? But
Yeah.
but bottom line is like when you really look at it, there's so many fighters out there who would love to fight for a trigger show, a rising trigger show,
Mhm.
even though it's for like let's say 2000, because they think it's an opportunity, and it's in an opportunity in a way because if you win a couple, right, that could lead you to the bigger show, which is a bigger rising show with a bigger money. So. I think this Rising's move is also opening a door to the other foreign fighters.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
'Cause I was kind of thinking currently the Rising situation is that they develop the fighters through Pancrase and Deep
Mhm.
mainly.
For now, yes.
And but this Rising Trigger, would you say that's almost competition to them?
Almost. At certain, and also
If
because
it's developing young fighters.
yeah, exactly. Because once if all the travel restrictions all gone, and if you can start getting all the visa easy as like before, Pancrase is going to start booking non-Japanese fighters, obviously, and so
Right.
as VTJ, the Vale Tudo Japan, obviously, are kind of like a competitor, right, for Rising
Right.
because they're a tag team with Shuto and pretty much with one championship. So they're going to start bringing in non-Japanese fighters.
Mhm.
So I think Rising would have to do the same.
Right.
Yeah. So 20 shows, that's a lot of shows to fill.
Right.
Yeah. So I think to answer your questions, yeah, it's a little oversaturated. And I think right now you feel that way because it's all Japanese fighters.
Right.
And I think in the future, I think it's going to be kind of interesting. And and my biggest fear right now is like this landmark show will be end up with showcasing some of the YouTubers who is not
Uh,
really qualified to fight.
turns into celebrity boxing.
Yeah, exactly. And then telling me that kid who does editing work for I mean Mikura Sakura is
Yeah.
challenging one of my client, Ren Hiramoto. I don't even know the kid's name. Something Sasaki, you know?
So one of the guys that's like his YouTube crew is
Right,
challenging.
right.
Oh
And
man.
the kids are apparently making good money from the YouTube channel.
Yeah, they
So
all are.
yeah, he was actually saying he's offering Ren like 100K if he loses, right, or something like that. And I think that's catching a huge attention of MMA fans.
I will say, I mean, I went to the Deep show
Mhm.
yesterday, and there definitely is the Asakura rub because fighters that are associated with him and train at Triforce, they're
Mm.
showing up at these events. And because they're on his YouTube channel, they have a ton of fans.
Well, I haven't talked to Ren about this yet, but if I were Ren, I would just totally ignore it. But he replies to everything what Sakura
Yeah.
says, and the fans are all excited about it. But they should even belong in the same sentence. Yeah, look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, yeah, because where would the fight even happen? Yeah, it's just weird.
yeah. But I think it seems like that's like a different culture and almost like a set of fans that it's almost bring a big source of resource. I mean, income
Yeah.
for Rising, right? Obviously, I mean, so you can underestimate that market.
Well, it's the same
Yeah.
thing with Deep because it's what's kind of fun about these local shows is
Mhm.
a fighter like that fights when his fight's over, a quarter of the audience gets up and leaves.
Is that what it is?
And you're just like, holy crap, like all these people just came to watch this guy fight. And they're like, he's done. I'm going home. Kind of thing. And you get that more at a lot of these local shows.
Right. I mean, I've seen that like old days of Eddie Alvarez because he sold like 700 tickets while the whole promotion sold 400 kind of stuff. You know, so
Yeah,
once
exactly.
these fights are over, more than half the crowds are gone. You know.
Right, which to me is just like, why don't you put this person in the main event and just keep these
Right.
people
Yeah.
seated?
Exactly. You want to make sure that everybody stays right to the end.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
So, all right. So the Trigger shows. Besides the Trigger show, Rising announced the Okinawa
Right,
show with
which
a
I
main
think
event.
looks better than the Yokohama show.
For now, yeah, it looks like it for now. Yeah, I mean, just for the
Yeah.
couple of cards, they announced the full cards so far.
They haven't announced the full card so far, but the fights they've announced so far already look better to me. Because Rising Yokohama, they were completely focused on Saito versus Koike,
Okay,
and Koike is injured.
right.
And
I mean,
so,
he's gonna sign back, but he's not gonna fight for a while now, right?
right, well, now like Rising's mad at him and all this stuff.
Right,
There's like a
right,
back
right.
and forth. And so now the Rising, now like the entire Rising Yokohama cards, like the poster is Saito. And I'm just like, I mean, Saito's not like this ball of charisma that's selling tickets.
Oh,
I
I
don't know
know. I
why.
think that was a huge risk from a marketing point of view. I mean, I couldn't
Like,
believe they did that actually.
it's like, what's going on here? Like, why'd you pick him?
Right, and the opponent is Ushiku, who is like almost nobody from the
Right,
general public's point of view.
right. I'm just like, why isn't this Kana Asakura's show? She's the most popular on the card by
Hmm.
far, but I don't know. But back to Ryzen Okinawa. I mean, Ryzen Okinawa, the press conference is kind of funny because they didn't announce the main event, but behind Sakakibara the entire time was just a video loop of Rena and Miyu. So I'm like, oh, I guess the main event is Rena versus
It would
Miyu.
have to be, right? Yeah, I mean, we
Yeah.
kind of knew, right? It's just it was weird, right?
Well, it was the rumor. I mean, the rumor was that Crazy B has a branch in Okinawa,
Sure,
so Miyu was going to be on the card.
right.
And then the other rumor was that Nisei was going to be on the card
Uh-huh.
because she's from Okinawa. And like
Right.
any fighter with any like relation to Okinawa was going to be on the
Yeah,
card.
Tsunabe was, yeah, also
Right.
he's a big name in Okinawa, who's
And
actually also known as donating most of his sponsorship money to some charity every time he fights.
yeah.
Yeah,
And I mean, Nisei was in Odeon beer commercials and is like a fisherman in Okinawa. So that made
that's
sense for
right.
her to be
Yeah,
on
he
there.
was in the beer commercial. So he's a
And
local name, big time.
well, I don't know his local name, but he's got support.
Right.
And I saw people questioning, like, why is Nisei on this card? And I'm like, well, she's on
Mhm.
the card because they want Okinawan local fighters. And
Right.
that's not that deep of a pool when
Right.
you start digging
Yeah.
around.
And also they have the Koji in there, which is pretty popular, right? Guy on
Right.
the
They didn't announce who
roster.
his opponent was. I think Koji just called them and said he wanted to be on the card.
Mm-hmm.
And Sidario is on the card as well. And I believe he's fighting Saint, or is that the Yokohama card? That
Saint
might be the
against scenarios on the Yokohama card, no?
that's my sorry, that's the Yokohama card.
Right, yeah,
I
all
thought
right,
they
yeah.
announced that for the Okinawa, but it's all blurring together in my mind.
Yeah, but no, this I could see what you're saying. The Okinawa cards are very interesting. They did put in a very interesting name, which is actually generally known name too. You know,
Right.
Koji, Reina, Miyuna, you know. And I
Well,
think people realize that Okinawa actually is a pretty good market for MMA. That's why they did the King of the Cage did the show there, and so there's a couple of shows who all sold well because of the presence of American
right,
military base too. Because all these guys like to go see MMA show. You know,
right.
on top of that,
And
it's popular name among the Japanese general public. I think they'll sell tickets well there. You know,
plus, I'm glad to see that Bay Noah's back.
yeah.
Bay Noah's hilarious.
Beno is
He's
hilarious. Yeah,
he
he's like a
speaks
comedian, right?
right. Yeah, he's
Yeah,
like an
right.
aspiring comedian. He's American, so he speaks English. So that might appeal to the MMA, the military base. He
Mm-hmm.
speaks fluent Japanese. And he
Mm-hmm.
makes the crowds laugh. And his last fight, he did a lot better than I thought he was going to do.
Oh yeah, it was very entertaining, and he actually showed the potential.
Yeah,
And he's got a pretty good physical ability. You know.
right. And
Yeah.
I mean, Rena is obviously still insanely popular. So is Miyu Yamamoto, and it's kind of the perfect time for this rematch. I mean, their first fight was Miyu's first fight ever,
Right.
and
MMA
it was
fight.
Rena's second fight.
Right.
And now it's 5 years later, and their careers have kind of taken very different paths.
Mm-hmm. And Okinawa is after all is the place that she spent her time with late Kid Yamamoto on the
Right.
last days years of their life. So this is a
Plus, I think,
place I think she wants to do something, right? So
and I think Rena also was involved because Rena, you ever follow her on social media, she takes a lot of vacations to Okinawa, like
Hmm.
almost every year, pretty much. And
Right.
I think she and Miyu both kind of reached out, like we want to be on the Okinawa card.
That's good though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Plus, you got to think that this is kind of perfect timing because if you win in Okinawa and don't get badly damaged, the New Year's Eve card is right around the corner.
yeah. So they could be in there pretty. Yeah.
Yeah. Now,
Well,
I mean, if you're injured, it's not going to happen. But if you get a quick finish or you
mhm.
don't get hurt, it's not that far of a stretch of the imagination to think that they could be pulled up to the New Year's Eve card.
That's true. Right. Now, actually, let me answer these questions. Somebody is asking, saying, any idea how many tickets Rising 31 sold? I have no idea. Do
Was
you?
that the Rising 31? Is
Yokohama.
oh, it's not even. I mean, hasn't happened yet. So I imagine they're still
Yeah,
selling
so
tickets.
I'm pretty sure they probably sold like 5,000, right? Is this still like
Well, how many
government
tickets they're trying
restriction?
to sell?
Yeah, I mean, is this still
Um,
government restriction?
I think their current plan usually is 50%, and so
Ah,
that'd be right around 5,000.
mm,
But I don't see them selling that many.
right. I one other viewer say the Rising Twitter had a Koike happy birthday tweet yesterday, but I think the staff
They
does that
did,
just
but
automatically,
I think
right?
they have like a reminder set up
Yeah,
probably when they're done
almost
with
right,
every fighters.
right. So I mean, yeah. So I mean, for now, Okinawa looks much better card than Yokohama card, which is next week.
In my opinion, yes. In my
Yes,
opinion,
my opinion too. I mean,
yeah.
besides the main event, what are the other matchup are you really looking forward to? I mean, I
Oh,
can't
for
even
the
think about the Okinawa card so much.
are you asking about the Yokohama or the Okinawa card?
I mean Yokohama. I'm sorry. Yeah, Rising
The
31.
fights that stick out to me: Sidario versus Saint,
Right.
because
Okay.
Saint is a huge puncher, very new in his career.
Right.
These are the kinds of fights that Sidario should have been getting,
Uh huh.
just up and coming heavyweights. I'm kind of interested to see what Oshima does in her debut because she's a micro and atom weight champion
Sure.
in
And
the
she's only been
individuals.
doing MMA for like 2 years, right? That's kind of amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but also I think she's a interesting from a branding standpoint because a lot of times, like in WMMA, they try to sell like sex appeal or something like that. But
Mm-hmm.
she's a mother of twins
Mm-hmm.
and she's married to a judo guy. She's been doing judo for 20 years, like since she was 3. And so it's kind of an interesting, different angle they could market it from. Because like when she fights, you can normally see like Rena or Hamasaki ringside, like holding her kids.
Sure.
So it's much. I think that's kind of fun. But
Yep.
Sidario, this is like his first, in my opinion, legitimate test. His opponent was so physically compromised the entire fight.
Yeah.
I had
Well,
no idea. It was the weirdest fight because I don't know what the situation was, but it looked like his opponent had a legitimate leg injury and
right.
could barely walk. And I know Sidario injured his leg with a kick as well. So
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like two hobbled guys fighting each other in the ring.
That's true. But this
But
guy Saint, I have never seen this guy fight. I
I,
mean,
s- I saw him fight in person one time. I think he
uh-huh.
knocked his opponent out in 2 or 3 seconds. It was literally like one punch and it was over. He's a very large man.
All right, so this is going to be pretty interesting. So you think Sadari will probably shouldn't be standing and trading punches then?
Absolutely not. Should
Okay.
not be exchanging with this guy.
Yeah, so he should. So let's see if he can take this guy down. Then
Yeah, and that was what was kind of interesting in the last fight was
Hmm.
that his ground skills looked very lacking, in my opinion.
Just
But
yeah,
you
right.
have to take into account that he's just recently started MMA.
Sure.
But I don't think he was used to someone trying to take his back and things like that. Is what it
Mm.
looked like.
Well, let's see. I mean, this is.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, this is one of the fighters Rising is really pushing, right? Because even though after all these troubles, him and his
Yeah.
corner made, they still keep using him. You know.
Plus, I think he was training in America for this fight. So
Sure.
let's see if
Right.
that. I think he's in Vegas training. So let's see if that helps.
Yeah. Even though it's short period, I might open the
Yeah.
door, right? Now,
Hmm.
besides him, you see a couple of UFC veterans, which is Masanori Kanehara and
Hmm.
Daichi Abe.
Yes.
Yeah, which is not many fans are really talking about these two guys now.
No.
No. I wonder why. I mean, Daichi Abe, actually, he had a short career in UFC. He went to one, and actually, he didn't win much there, too, right?
Yeah, I
And
mean, it's
I
just
thought he kind of disappeared, but he kind of came back.
there's just two types of fighters that I think fight abroad in Japan.
Hmm.
There's the ones that fight abroad and everyone sees them like it's representing Japan and their success is our success. And then there's the kind of fighters that go abroad and kind of disappear
Yeah.
and no one pays attention to them and they come back and they're like, "Oh, you're a fighter." So, I think both of these guys kind of fall into that category in my
Yeah,
opinion.
that's true, right? And Abe, I don't know where he trains and stuff like that. And his weight class, there's limited places they can train in Japan. So
Right.
I wonder about his training environment. Although he was a Pancrase champion, he was also a Rise champion. So on the record, he has a kickboxing title and MMA title.
Right.
So, but every time I see his fights, he looks like he runs out of gas very quickly.
Oh, so he's got to finish them
Especially when the
quickly.
fight get into, yeah, exactly. Especially the fight gets into the grappling mode. I think
Mm,
he has no grappling stamina. You know,
interesting.
yeah, that's what I feel about him. And Kanehara always is a super veteran, and
Right.
if every client of mine and every fighters I know who trained with the Kanehara, they all say, "Man, Kanehara is really tough. He may be the best bantamweights in Japan." Blah 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 blah. I heard that for like maybe almost like the past 10 years. But this is a guy who really can produce on actual fight.
So it's like one of those guys that's really good in the gym, but when it comes to
Yes,
fight night, he just falls
right,
apart.
right. So he's
Interesting.
one of those guys. So let's see how he does in this new weight class, which is a featherweight.
How do you feel about Daisuke Nakamura making a shouldn't he be on a Trigger show? If
Well,
that's the theme
Tyson
of
is like
Trigger.
42 years old, right? He's pretty old.
Yeah, but I went to a Pancrase show
Hmm.
earlier this year, and he brutally knocked his opponent out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And he did beat Juntaro Oshiku once too,
Yeah.
right? So he's still up there, you know?
Well, I think Pancrase has been handling correctly. It's not like they've been throwing him in there against the champion. They've been fighting fighters that are kind of his level
Hmm.
and having him fight that, which is fun
Right. And he
because
still probably uses that old UWF shin guard and stuff like that when he fights, right?
I don't
No?
think so. I think he was only wearing like the Speedo when I saw him
Yeah.
fight.
So for those viewers who doesn't know, he's like coming from the old UWF pro wrestling style. So
Right.
there's still hard old core fans on that era who really still likes UWF, and I guess he's like a last representative who's still
Yeah.
trying in MMA. You know,
I mean, he still looks good. He's just old.
right? And actually, I don't even know anything about this opponent, Suguru Ni. Do you know
I think
anything about him?
I think it's a similar situation where they've like kind of Pancrase, they've found an opponent that's his level.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, then actually, there's another guy who I want to mention, which is right before these guys fight, which is Takuya Yamamoto. I
Hmm.
think he's a Grachan champion,
Okay.
and I always thought that he's like a physical monster. So this is going to be actually interesting fight, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, because I always thought that Shirakawa only got into RIZIN because he was with the Asakura brothers. You know,
Hmm.
right? So I have a feeling Takuya will prove it right, something right here that maybe Shirakawa
Yeah.
doesn't belong in there.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's a bunch of fighters that hang around the Asakuras that have like meddling records.
right, exactly. I just to get into Rising, or just get into
Yeah.
breakdown, or just to start new YouTube channels.
Right.
Right. So
Well,
they
they
can
all
get
kind of
their
look the
own
same.
viewership.
They're all like punks or they like have like a punk attitude, like hip hop gangster attitude. And I think they all have like a lot of female fans. Maybe their
Here,
records
let
aren't
me
that
see
good.
this chart. It's really funny because I'm gonna have to go back to that talk about the Ren Hiramoto and
Yeah.
Asakura is one of the editing men who wants to fight Hiramoto. And I heard among the MMA fans or fight fans, Ren is much more popular, much more known. Of course, right? Of course.
Oh,
I don't
then this
even know.
editor guy?
Yeah,
Of
compared to, of
course. Yeah.
course, right? You don't
Yeah,
have
of
to
course.
mention, but I heard that Mikuru said that in the general public, this editor is thousand times more known than Ren Hiramoto. I mean,
So he's like splitting
disagree with
hairs.
that.
He
Right,
was like he's like amongst fight fans, of course Ren's more popular, but this
right.
random subsect that I choose, the my photographer guy is more popular.
Right, but and the reason behind it was saying is that because all the Mikuru's YouTube videos, a total viewership is like 8 million or something like that, or
I think
8 billion or whatever that is, right? It was like a lot of
it's way
viewership.
higher than 8 million because he has like over a billion subscribers.
Exactly,
But
right. So the reason behind that theory is just because on the YouTube channel, just because of billions of viewers, is that gonna make this one of the guy who in that video up more popular and known among the general public of Japan?
let's say there's a difference. You have to separate popular from like aware.
Right. But it was
And
awareness too, because I would say there's a lot of elderly in the Japanese society, and lots of
right,
them don't even watch YouTube, right?
let's say amongst the young demographic, he might
Hmm.
have a point that more people know who this guy is. But I mean, how many of them do you think know his name?
Right.
They might just be
Exactly.
like, "You look familiar. Are you that guy from those Mikuru Asakura videos?"
I don't
So
even know his first name because I know his last name
yeah,
was Sasaki. You know,
right.
right? And I guess he apparently fought a
It's kind
couple
of a
times.
weird claim too, because Rin Hiramoto is pretty popular.
Right. I mean, again, that's what my biggest concern now is that because of these landmarks and Trigger and all these different shows, it's going to open the door to those guys who's really not. It doesn't really belong there. You know,
Well, do you think he actually wants to fight Rin Hiramoto, or he just wants to say some stuff and get
he
some
probably
rub on his name?
will. You know, but do you know
Yeah,
there's
because
some controversy behind this kid, Mr. Sasaki, who is the editor for Asakura? He actually did the crowdfunding and raised some money to open some pet shop or pet store, but closed it in like 6 months. So he
is he
didn't
the
really use.
guy? What does he look like? Is he the guy that always wears sunglasses and has like kind of long hair?
You know what? I'm not really proud of saying this as a people in this industry. I haven't really watched the entire Asakura
No,
Mikuru
I mean
video. I'm not
that's
even
why I'm
honest.
asking because I don't.
So,
I mean, his videos are really popular, but I don't really watch
me
Miku's
too. I
videos
don't really watch them at all.
because
So
they're pretty much just like him hanging around
right,
talking about like how wise and smart he is,
right.
and I'm like not that
And
interested.
like me, I have a lot of people who sends me a message, even though I don't ask about it. They feed me a lot of information. And one of the guy told me that this kid was on some barbecue video with the Miku Asakura, and I guess these guys makes really good money too, right? And
Yeah.
he could easily buy a Ferrari with the cash. So
Well,
Ferrari is way more than 100K. So
I
for
just
him
hear
to
from like from what I hear when they show like their apartments and like their YouTube videos and stuff,
Mhm.
unless they're doing like a bait and switch situation, they're all living in like $10,000 a month apartments in
More, probably
Tokyo.
even more, right?
Yeah,
20,000. Yeah, yeah.
so they're all living in like extremely expensive places, which to me, I'm like a little old school. I'm just like, what happens if your YouTube channel falls through?
Yeah,
Like,
I know. And besides, well, then why don't you start buying something instead of renting, right?
right, exactly.
But obviously, Mikuru is thinking more ahead because he bought a land, I guess, and he's building a
Well,
condominium or something like that, so he can get a rent home.
He's
Yeah,
different. I
right.
mean, it almost feels like an entourage.
Yeah, they are under exactly. It's entourage, and
Yeah.
then Mikuru is a businessman who's doing
Right,
well in that sense. So I think, in a way, he understands his value.
right.
He's playing the both side of the table in a way with the Fuji Television and the Bema TV. Now he knows he has a value in the pay-per-view market.
I mean, even at 80,000, I mean, I'm terrible at math,
Hmm.
but if he could sell $50 pay-per-views and sell 80,000 tickets,
That's not
he
bad
could
at
do it.
all.
He could do his own shows
Right. He can easily do own shows.
because there's nothing about that production that was like unique or anything.
Right.
It was actually a fairly what that's $4 million. I'm sure he would love to do that.
Right. And in Mikuru's position, let's say if the broadcaster is asking for a 50-50 kind of deal, he can sort of probably push the deal because he can guarantee some numbers, right?
Or he could just host it on his own site.
Right.
He could just host it because 80,000 is not a huge number. To get the server strength to handle that wouldn't be that crazy.
Yeah.
And
Right.
if he could just start hosting it himself, and then he could do like his own Mikuru Presents shows where he has
Mhm.
his YouTube guys fight on it as well.
And I think that's what he's doing with the breakdowns almost, right?
Yeah.
With that
Hmm.
Bama TV. So, he's started becoming a one-man business machine right there in the Japanese MMA world.
Oh my
Mhm.
god, I have to bring now that you speak of Mikuru, I saw the funniest thing in the Rising Confession video. I want to know if you noticed this as well. So
Okay, what is it?
Shoji, people are kind of teasing Shoji because he seems to
Right,
like
because he's
always be
everywhere.
hanging. He's
Right,
everywhere, and he's always
right,
hanging around the Asakura brothers.
right.
And so after he got this crazy fight, he knocked the guy out. They
Uh-huh.
show him like running to go talk to the Asakura brothers.
Yeah.
And as he's going into their locker room, Panchan Rin is outside, and she
Uh-huh.
like says, "Congratulations." She's like talking to him, and he just like waves her off. It doesn't even like say anything, and goes right past her to the Asakura brothers.
Wow.
And I was
That's
just like, "This is like the perfect encapsulation of like people trying to get YouTube attention." It's like her trying to like come out and say hi to him after his win, and him just like, "I'm going to the more famous people. Get out of my way."
I mean, I think some of the Japanese fighters are obsessed by these YouTube numbers. They think
Yeah.
like they use YouTube as a yardstick. There's too many things, which really is
Um,
not right.
it's hard to. I've thought about this because I've like had discussions with other people, and
Hmm.
it's hard to figure out how much YouTube pays people. But there's like rough numbers you can go by, and when you look at the numbers that he gets,
It's not much.
you start thinking like, unless they have different deals with Japanese people,
Uh-huh.
where they're like YouTube's trying to get more popular in Japan,
Uh-huh.
so they have like a different rate for people in Japan. He's shouldn't be making a lot of like a crazy amount of money.
Well, here's what it is. Actually, I know for the fact, even in the States and stuff, if you became a certain popular YouTuber with a certain number of subscribers, you do negotiate with
Yeah,
YouTube. So
that's
instead
what
of
my
getting XX per viewership, they get 3 times more kind of stuff.
yeah, that's what has to
Yeah.
be because
Right, it has
when
to
you
be,
compare
right.
those numbers, it doesn't make. I mean, it would be a lot of money, but it wouldn't
Mhm.
be like I'm buying a Ferrari and this
Exactly.
is my
Right.
mansion, and
Right.
everyone that works for me also lives in a mansion.
Hmm. But
But
that's why actually the clear sign, that's why they start doing this thing for Kirinuki, which is like they even make a 3 minutes versions of like 15-minute video they had. So they
yeah,
still have to scrunch for this viewership basically.
right.
Yeah, so it's a clear sign that yeah.
Mm.
Well, here you go. He says the JMA fighters on YouTube is great. They're making the sport bigger. RIZIN would have probably died during COVID without Mikuru influencing all these other fighters. Yeah, which I
Um,
understand. Yeah.
I will say I agree with this in the sense that one of the problems I think Japanese fighters have historically had
Mm-hmm.
is the like refusal to show anything about their personality
Yeah, that's true. Right.
and just
But
be
now they
like,
are. Right.
"How's the fight going to be? Ganbarimasu." Just like, "I'm
Yeah.
gonna do my best. What's some of this?" Or just something like that. Where the ones that are successful on YouTube are the ones that show who they really are and like show their
Mm-hmm.
personality. I mean, I could watch videos of Horiguchi fishing all day long. Those are
Right.
hilarious. But
I
and
said it's less about what YouTube pays you and more about getting members to your channel, super chats for live streams, outside endorsement. Yeah, yeah,
no, I mean
that
he
too.
has
Only
to be
for
getting
big names. Yeah,
Asakura's big money comes from
right,
sponsorships. I mean,
right.
that's
That
where that comes
that
from.
makes sense, right? But here's what it is. I'm doing something very interesting with Mizuki and Naoki. Their YouTube channels, we refuse to hire any production people to do any work for us, and we have refused to make their channels, uh, uh, profitable, meaning so they're not collecting any money. So you can't do
Yeah.
super chat, none of that. And only thing they're doing is the live streaming and also just the collaboration with other people.
I was looking at that the other day. Their numbers jumped recently.
Yeah, because of attention.
Their live, well, not just that. I mean, their live chat views, like,
Yes. And
there's a
actually, here's
couple.
what it is. I said, all the other Japanese other fighter, they do so much collaborations and they do retweet and tweet and present, all kinds of stuff, try to get a viewership going. Mizuki and Naoki's not into that at all. So they're just like dumping on me, and I can't do all this stuff. So I'm like, let's say, okay, let's do a live stream. If let's
Yeah,
just
because
sit and see if they want to do a collaboration, they could do it, but they're gonna have to edit the half-hour version, and they're gonna have to give it to us. That's it.
well, I remember like seeing one of the videos where Mizuki was like essentially said she doesn't really like doing the YouTube videos, but
Right.
she does it for the fans. So like if there's like a fight coming up that they wanted to talk about, she'll do that.
Yeah.
But she's not really interested in becoming a YouTuber at all.
No, not at all. And they don't even want to study about it. They don't want to even think
Yeah.
about it. You know what I mean? So, but that Naoki has pointed out, I guess if you can do a super chat, that will give you a right to ask more questions and you can answer in priority kind of stuff and during the live
Interesting.
streaming. So that's something we have to consider. So we're thinking about just doing that just so it would be a good fan service.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of interesting. In social media stuff, all there's so many opportunities. I mean,
Mhm.
one example is I was talking to Stamp Fairtex, and she was saying on TikTok, people can give you money and gifts.
Yeah.
And and then she lives in Thailand. I mean, not the biggest economy in the world.
Right.
And so it's like, she's making money off of TikTok. Like she doesn't have a TikTok sponsorship, but she's getting a lot of money from this. All of a sudden, it makes sense why she's uploading TikTok videos all the time.
Here's what it is, Charlie. That's good, I think, for
Yeah,
fighters like that. But also on the other side of the coin, there are a bunch of Japanese young girls who does similar live streaming where they can receive those tokens of the
yeah,
money, and majority of them are like not,
creepy old dudes.
yeah, like little before adult porn star, or
Yeah.
like almost like hostesses,
Hmm.
and I don't know if I really like that, and they're saying thank you so much for like $5 here and $3 there, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the nickel and diming.
No,
It's
yeah, you
crazy.
don't want to do that, and especially a fighter like Mizuki who's in UFC and Naoki
No, no, no,
who's,
no, no.
yeah, no, I mean
It's a very different
it's just a
situation.
negative value, right? It's just a negative for these two.
Well, it's different too because I've always maintained like a fighter should have a YouTube channel. If they want to have a YouTube channel,
Right.
because nothing comes across like worse than when like the fighters are like faking it.
Yes.
And
There's no
so
reason to.
I've
Right.
always said like you should just be yourself, be natural. If you're a shit talker, be a shit talker. If you're
Right.
like one of the respect people, just be the respect person and let your results talk. And
Because let's say for in a comparison, let's say look at like Alex Volkanovski's YouTube channel, like UFC
yeah,
champion, but he only puts up video once in a while, but it's pretty interesting, slick stuff. It doesn't
mhm.
attract millions of views and stuff like that, but it's a pretty interesting service to the fans.
Well, I always say like the classic example is Demetrius Johnson,
Mm,
who was kind of like rejected by the UFC promotion machine, and he just like built up fans on Twitch
right,
and playing video games.
right,
And I'm like, he
exactly,
likes playing video games. It makes perfect sense that this is how he's hanging out with his fans, doing fan service, is playing video games with them.
right. So exactly. So I think that Max Holloway is sort of doing the same thing. He's been playing a
Right.
video game on the Facebook Live all the time. So
Yeah.
that's actually an interesting way to, gather your own group because in Japan there's a big thing called online salon, right? Some of the big
Yeah.
name comedians and stuff like that, they have this membership and they get together a couple of times a week, whatever that is, and some makes millions of dollars doing that. So
That's my
you make
one
your own world, own country.
one of my criticisms though of the Japanese market though is they always want to put everything behind a paywall.
Yeah, I know.
And I'm just like, you should just do this stuff for free
Yeah,
and build up the fan base first because the paywalls are usually expensive too.
right,
Just like you should definitely maybe you can have like a premium version of what you're doing,
right.
but I feel like you should at least be producing a bunch of free content.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I think in terms of Naoki and Mizuki's YouTube channels, we just like to provide the contents free for the fans to, enjoy it. That's it.
Well, and that way the content gets out and
Hmm.
people see it, people start talking about it, and it benefits them as well as the fan. Everyone
Yeah.
wins kind of
But
situation.
again, but not too often, and not like what everybody else is doing. It's like almost everybody's doing the same thing now. Either
Well, my
collaboration.
criticism of all the Japanese fighters on YouTube was that they were all doing the same thing.
Yeah, exactly, exact same thing. Right,
Like
predictions and
Mikuru and
fights.
Kai would do a video, and then 2 weeks later, every other fighter would have a video of them doing the exact same thing.
Right. And I hate to tell you this, Kai also copies what Mikuru does too, right? I'm
Yeah,
still
but
using the
I
side of
like
the
Kai's
Kai there.
I like Kai's YouTube better. I think he's less serious,
Oh, really? Like
and he
I
kind of
have
goes like
not
a
seen
more
it
comedic.
was.
I mean, when Kai would dress up like a nerd and go to Akihabara
Yeah, yeah,
and
I
try to,
saw that. Yeah, I heard
those
that.
were funny, and so I liked that. And because Mikuru is always like super serious, and Kai always seems more playful.
Uh-huh.
But I mean, who do you think has the? I mean, Mikuru has the most followers, but I would say that Kai's is probably my favorite. Sugiyama's is kind of funny because she stalks other fighters and follows them to their gym. But
Right. So, but that's like almost like a TV, old Japanese TV variety show
Right.
of them doing on their own. And I guess some fighter enjoys it and they have the character for it, but you don't want to force yourself to doing that. And I could never picture Naoki doing something like that.
No, and he
You know,
shouldn't.
you
By the
know,
way, I'm still laughing every time you say Naoki. I keep thinking of that interview question where the guy asked him what he wanted to do when he retired,
right.
and he said, "I don't know. I've worked in a convenience store before. Maybe I'll do that."
Yeah, he said the only job experience he has is work at the convenience store. That's all he knows. But I really wouldn't be surprised that I don't really talk about it so much, but I always tell Naoki that save 50% of your money. Don't even
Yeah,
touch it. And I think he's that kind of type too. He barely spend money. He doesn't. It's not like he wants to buy a nice fancy car or expensive
yeah,
watch or none of that. But I know how much money he makes, so he's making much more money than regular 24 years old now. So
yeah,
I can totally picture thinking like I'm just gonna earn enough money to live off rest of my life when I'm like 35,
yeah. Move
right?
back to the
And maybe,
countryside.
maybe yeah, exactly. Maybe work at the 7-Eleven twice a week, like no stress, no pressure, right?
Yeah.
Stress free. What the heck? That's actually another lifestyle that that's actually something you can't criticize about, right? I mean,
So, did he and Mizuki work at the same convenience store?
yeah. So as their mother.
That's that's absolutely hilarious. I know that there's barely like the crime doesn't really exist that
Right,
in that way in Japan.
right,
But can you
right.
imagine like someone robbing a 7-Eleven and having two MMA fighters working
Oh
behind
my
the counter?
god! And there's no the gun controller there, so they're in shit out of luck, right? When that
Yeah, exactly.
happens. Yeah. But funny that Mizuki told me once one of the customer actually liked her a lot. So one day he showed up and little notes and just put it on the cashier's table and with his phone number on it.
So creepy.
Yeah, it's kind of creepy.
I can't. I've never understood how people could do that. Where like they like hit on someone working. It's like especially when they're working in like a convenience store, because then like there's like six people watching as you're waiting in line.
Yeah, but
You're just like,
Charlie, I'm gonna tell you this: if somebody freaky looks did this thing, he looks creepy, right? Like people think, well, that
mhm.
guy's a creep. But let's say if the Richard Gere or Brad Pitt did this that would be a romantic movie. The scene
Yeah,
from
but
the
that's
film.
but the guy that gave her the note wasn't Brad Pitt or Richard Gere. I guarantee you it was the creepy guy. Because only the creepy guy would be like, you know who's hot? That girl at the 7-Eleven across the street.
Right, and also I tell you a funny story. Once, after the first UFC fight, Naoki was still working at 7-Eleven, and one of those Jada people show up for the drug test, right? But he
At a
was
7-Eleven.
7-Eleven. He was working the cashier, and of course he had to ask this guy to wait till I get to the break, so I got to
Yeah,
do this job. But
yeah.
under the WADA rules, once the inspector shows up at the scenes, the fighters cannot be out of his sight.
So this
So
guy's
the
just following him
inspector say,
around.
"Okay, we can wait," but he had to be right by the cashier behind the coffee machine, staring at Naoki working as a cashier. And the customer started complaining that who's that creepy guy?
Staring at was it a Japanese guy?
The Japanese guy, because they use the JADA, Japan Anti-Doping Agency.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, right.
Because
But
I always remember I always remember the classic USADA story of the guy going down to Jose Aldo and dropping the urine and
oh
like
yeah, I
losing the
know.
sample. It's
Right,
like,
right.
okay, but that's neither here nor there. There should be a TV show of just the Inoues working at a convenience store.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, it's funny though, but so I could totally picture him going back and work there.
Yeah,
Yeah. But here's
interesting.
what it is. It's so funny. But then, actually, after that conversation, this sponsor asked Naoki, "Well, don't you think about opening a gym?" You know. And then Naoki says, "Well, I have to rely on my sister about that." So,
Personality-wise, I just don't see him like ever running a gym.
no,
Like,
exactly right. Yeah. I mean, it's so funny. We joked him about that, and his voice is so small, right? So he won't
yeah,
be able to teach anybody because his just voice is too small. He doesn't reach out to anyone.
because in my experience, from what I've seen in Japan, the way you make money as a gym is you have a lot of kids classes,
Hmm.
and that's where like you get like your that's what pays all your bills is
Right.
having kids
Yeah.
classes.
Right.
And I just can't see him. I mean, maybe Mizuki, but I can't see him like running around with a bunch of kids
Well, you know
trying to
what?
like make
Actually,
karate
Charlie,
fun.
believe it or not, he's very good with the kids. He's
Oh,
been a
that's right.
very good babysitter for my son. However, that doesn't mean he can handle 10 kids and teach
Yeah.
classes in a little disciplined way. You know, what I mean, that's a different story. So I think I can picture
Interesting.
Mizuki teaching the classes, and he could be just an assistant, like a teacher's assistant. You know,
Interesting.
imagine that. Like you got a two UFC fighter, but one cannot teach you one class, so it's you need a two to do one class.
So it's kind of off subject, but you mentioned this. I wanted to talk about the Vale Tudo Japan stuff.
Well, yes. So no, let's go back to this Okinawa
Okay.
RIZIN show, and many fans expected Tatsuro Taira to be in this show, and many
Right.
fans were very surprised that he didn't show up at the press conference. His name was not even mentioned, and more than likely he'll be fighting for Vale to the Japan instead.
Yeah. So I wanted to start out with a question I had about Vale Tudo
Hmm.
Japan was
Hmm.
everyone knows Vale Tudo Japan is associated with Shuto,
Right?
and they've announced their first event. I believe Cal Uno is fighting on it.
Mm-hmm.
But
Karim was fighting. Yeah.
my question to you was it's listed as the same day and location as a Shuto event.
Yeah, in the morning, Shuto at
So
night.
okay, that's what I wanted to ask. So in the morning is going to be the Shuto, and in the
Right.
evening is going to be the Vale Tudo Japan.
Right. Because Vale
Okay.
to Japan is basically an offshoot of Shuto, you know, because
Well, I
back
just wanted
then
to make sure
Shuto,
because
right.
it was weird because they only announced one fight. So I was like, is
Mhm.
one of the fights on the Shuto show being branded as a Vale Tudo
Now it's gonna
bout?
be the I think
Or
they're gonna announce more fights in upcoming
okay.
weeks. And actually I'm showing the screen right now because I think Mr. Sakamoto, who is the head of Sustain, who runs basically VTJ and Shuto, did the big interview with the Gong magazine
Mhm.
this week, and he talked about the visions of VTJ and what Shuto is going to do. So he has already mentioned guys like Taira or Yamato Nishikawa, which is the young, you know, lightweight champion,
Mhm.
or Sasuke featherweight champion. The VTJ will be the stage for them to fight the world talents, which
Right.
means they're mentioning the possibility of bringing in non-Japanese fighters from this show
Right.
immediately. So they're trying to compete against Rising in a way. This is an international show.
Plus, I mean, it's going to be on Abema TV, right?
It's going to be on Abema TV, and so I think it's not official yet, but Taira and Nishika, those guys will be fighting for this show, you know, instead of Rising.
Kind of interested to see how this goes because when they kind of did the VTJ, let's just call it two,
Hmm.
VTJ two back around 2010,
Hmm.
they put on some crazy events, but then it just kind of disappeared.
Right.
So
And
it's kind
because
of
you know,
interesting
because they weren't
situation.
going to do this on a regular basis, I think the whole Shudo's attitude is like this is something happens every once a couple of years. It's a very special event, you know.
Yeah. Mhm.
So they did again to just to do Megumi Huji.
Right.
So that type of stuff. So yeah, so I think this is the new brand. I think Shuto and Abema TV is going to try to push, and maybe this
Yeah.
is their answer to the Against the Rising. You know,
Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens because Shuto's kind of in a strange position. So it'll be interesting to see if they can use VTJ to kind of break free from that position they seem to be stuck
hmm
in.
right? So,
But
but here's what it is though. This is one thing about the Japanese MMA right now. Like almost every Japanese fighter wants to fight for Rising,
right.
except just a handful who's still looking at the UFC or one championship just because they fight for Shuto and everything else.
That's
So
what I've noticed. I mean,
yeah.
when I hear fighters talk, it used to be I want to fight for the UFC.
Hmm.
Nobody says that anymore. It's all I want to
No.
fight for Ryzen.
Right, because they think it's just too hard to get there because the corona, the
Yeah.
visa is hard to get, blah 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 blah. You know,
And it's such a realistic chance for them too,
it is
because Ryzen now is having to farm just any Japanese fighter they can find.
exactly
You can't find enough. So now's your chance to go up there, and if you win, you can stay there.
right. And actually, the phenomena I'm seeing is that the most of the Japanese fighters, especially the veterans, they believe they will get some call from the Rising, so they
Mhm.
tend to say no to all the other fight offers. So the clear
Okay.
example is Ashida, who's going to be fighting Kanehara on this upcoming Yokohama show. This is his
Yeah.
first fight in over a year. And I know he had an offer from Deep and everything else, but he kept saying no, hoping he'll get a call from Rise In again. And that happens to many, many fighters now. They feel like they're going to get a call, you know?
But wouldn't it be wiser to just fight for deep in Pancrase and know that they're the best way to get into RIZIN?
Yes, it's much wiser to talk to RIZIN beforehand. It even says, like, if I win this fight, can you get me in, kind of stuff, you
Yeah.
know? But I guess a lot of fighters management doesn't do that, you know?
Hmm.
Yeah,
I
so
mean, a lot of these fighters probably don't even have management.
mhm.
That's a good question. What percentage of Japanese fighters do you think don't have management, or just use their coach as their manager?
You know, you know what? Here's what it is. I don't want to name names, but in this conversation between like a Rising and the VTJ as well, there are a lot of fighters who got a call from Rising, or who got a call from VTJ, other way around. But coaches who serves as a manager has his own agenda or
Right.
relationship that they have to value, so they end up not telling the fighters the offer at all and make their own
Oh.
decisions. Right. So there are a lot of fighters who could have fought for VTJ but end up in Rising or the other way around.
So what you're saying is that Rin Nakai hasn't been getting these offers for fights for years, and
No,
legitimately thinks that there's been no offers.
Rin Nakai has been getting offers, but his coach slash manager slash husband, Mr. Usami, always has a reason to say no.
Yes.
Yeah. No, so to answer
Okay.
your question, I think majority of Japanese fighters does not have a manager because they have to sort of like follow what coaches says first.
Yeah.
And many coaches believe that most of their fighters are too early to work with the managers. Either their record is not good
Right.
enough or not matured enough, or whatever that is.
Well, it's just kind of interesting because you can kind of see the different gyms' approaches. Like, I mean, as you were saying, like Ryo Chonen's gym, those fighters tend to go to one FC, or they like a paths towards one championship because
Yeah,
he
exactly.
has
And
that path
the
towards one
question they are getting
championship.
from the viewers is, are there any independent shooter promoters left, or is it sustain the last one standing? To answer your question, yes, sustains the last one standing because Gutsman and also Alive, they both stopped doing their shooter shows.
Also,
Right.
though, Shuto's kind of like this crazy federation
Yes.
where there's a bunch of amateur Shuto stuff that's going on that I don't think Sakamoto has any involvement with.
Right.
Because
But here's
he
the
looks like
great
he's in,
thing about amateur shooter shows, that they do so much all over the Japan, and lots of staff who's involved in that shooter shows does for volunteer basis. So it's really from out of their passion. So
yeah.
it's a bunch of passionate groups of people, but
The only professional Shuto league is
yeah,
Sakamoto.
it's Sakamoto, right? And once you're in there, sometimes it's hard to get out. You know, you feel the
Mhm.
obligation to be in shooter and stuff like that. So
And
there's a lot of problem going on backstage, behind the scenes.
I think the guy that made that comment likes women's MMA news. So
Hmm.
Shuto just announced that Sawada is coming back for her second fight. And she's the younger sister of Ryoto Sawada, who fights for one championship.
Right, right.
So that's an exciting prospect. I think she's fighting Nakamura, who's fought like 4 times for Shuto this year. So
Hmm.
should be fun.
Right. So yeah, so they're trying to create some of their own interesting move there, but let's see if it's going to be how that's going to be turned out, because they do have Avema TV with them and one
Mhm.
championship, and they have the Dreamers, right? So they do have an interesting prospect coming up.
I mean, if I was Shuto, I would almost pour all of my resources into rebranding this VTJ
I would too. Yeah, I
because
totally agree.
Shuto's kind of like a little like sick. It's got like the one championship curse going on where
Right, and on
they're
top
just a
of
feeder
that, like there's a
organization.
Brazil. I mean, Shuto used to be a good brand name, like 15
Mhm.
years ago, but now there's a Brazilian Shuto, and yeah, nobody knows what
Yeah,
Shuto is right now at this point. So why
yeah,
not start the Vale to the Japan? And you can use
yeah,
Shuto as like a regular show, almost like a little one between in a minor league and major league kind of stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it is kind of interesting because I know that some fans are upset with like Vale to Japan or like Trigger using a cage.
Hmm.
But I will say that whenever they announce a cage, Japanese fans and fighters tend to get excited.
Oh yeah.
So I think that there's like this divide where like hardcore JMMA fans from abroad are like, "Oh, we hate the cage," but Japanese fans are like, "Ooh, something like the U.S. So it kind
Yeah,
of has like this
they're very
aura, feel to
interesting
it.
seeing the cage shows.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And someone asked me yesterday, why does Shinjuku Face not have the cage? And it's like because they can't get a cage in there.
no, they
Because
can't get a cage
Shinjuku,
in there. No, and also actually,
Shinjuku Face, I think, just has a permanent ring in there that they
right,
use.
and exactly. Actually, Shinjuku Face, when you rent a venue, the ring comes with it.
Yeah.
So basically, that you have to use a ring. Yeah,
Yeah. So like the only venues where you can use a cage then are like Korakuen Hall
American
or
Hall,
Studio
uh,
Coast.
yeah, Studio Coast or TDC Hall,
Yeah.
that type
But
of
TDC,
stuff.
I like TDC Hall, but it's just such an expensive venue that I don't really
Very
see people using
expensive,
that
right?
much.
It's almost the same capacity as a Korean Hall, but more than double. You know,
Yeah.
so it's a beautiful venue.
Right.
Yeah, it's too bad. And here we go. Let's answer this last question of the viewer. It says, "How is WMMA doing in Japan? I don't see who will replace Reina or Hamasaki still." That's
Oh,
a good question.
I feel uniquely qualified to answer this question.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, Kanako Murata and Mizuki are the two real top talents left. They're both in UFC.
Right. If you're
So,
talking about the local Japanese scene,
hmm
Deep Jewels has done it, and Deep have done a great job of developing local talent.
Yep.
And they've been trying to find someone, and that anything they're kind of rushing it, trying to find people for Rising because Rising
hmm
needs
Right.
women because of the pandemic. But top talent right now to keep your eye out for is Seika Izawa.
She has to be the one. Yeah.
I was training with I did like a crowdfunding thing where my wife got to go train with Sugiyama at her new gym, and she called Izawa a genius, like extremely skilled grappler. People are just can't believe it. She started fighting in 2020,
Right.
and she's already a better than
Almost
any
everybody.
strawweight or atom
Yeah.
weight in Japan. You know,
Right.
not counting Mizuki or Murata because they're over in the U.S. fighting.
Right. Right.
So of the atom weights and strawweights still in Japan, with less than a year's experience, she is the best fighter, and she's fighting at Deep next
hmm
week, this coming weekend. And if
Yeah.
she wins, she will be at Ryzen because the fight's at 49 kilograms, which is blatantly only Rising has that weight division, so
Right.
that's why she's going. The interesting thing is she'll be more in the Hamasaki camp because Rena is a very talented fighter, but she
hmm
kind of leaned into being cute and kind of her idol-esque nature, whereas Izawa is not really that cutesy, but she's so skilled, in my opinion.
Now here's the reason. I think Izawa probably could beat Asakura, to tell the truth, Kana, at this point.
Mhm.
And if she does,
Well,
then she'll be stuck in Rising. It means she
yeah.
probably won't be able to go to Invicta or UFC for a while. So that's something you got to be careful because
The crazy
she,
thing about her is Kana Sakura's whole game plan is a wrestling,
right.
and you saw that she lost to Yamamoto Miyu
hmm
because you can't out wrestle Yamamoto Miyu.
Exactly. No, I don't think Kana can beat Izawa on the ground at all. I don't think it's
And
even
I think
close.
Izawa's probably a better wrestler than Yamamoto Miyu at
Yeah,
this point in
Izawa
their
is a
lives.
better judoka, better wrestler,
Yeah,
meaning she could do better submission artist too. And I don't
yeah,
think Kana has too much submission games, to tell the truth, right?
no, and I mean she's got some striking, a little bit, kinda, but like, it's nothing to write home about.
Yeah,
And
and the ground control, that's it. You know?
I think her last fight got blown up because Hamasaki kind of like blew her wad trying to finish her with strikes in the first
Yeah,
round.
exactly. Hamasaki just ran out of gas. That's what happened.
Yeah, and so Izawa's going to be a stud. Saori Oshima, who's fighting for Rising,
Mhm.
my only problem with that is she's 4'11", so I
Yeah,
think she's very small
too
for the
small.
atomweight
Yeah,
division. But Miki Motono, whose only losses so far are to Seika Izawa, is
right.
also very good. But so they have people are emerging that can fill the role. The
Mhm.
only problem is that you got to give them some time because before Rena fought in, let's just say Rena is like the Ronda Rousey of Rising, and that she brought the women to Rising.
Mhm.
She'd been fighting since she was 16 years old.
Right.
So I mean, she had like 14 years of building her brand and all this experience that she brought with her when she came to Rising. So you need to give some of these young fighters time to build their audience.
Yeah, of
And
course. Right.
I'm going to be like an outlier and say I don't think Panchan Reina is the answer.
Mhm.
And
Why?
I just don't think she hasn't shown. I think to be a success, you got to finish people.
Yeah, you have to, right? Especially in Japanese.
And
Yeah.
if it's in Rena, kickboxer, she finishes people. I mean, she gets
Mhm.
body knock, liver punches, knockouts. She finishes people, and she's a kickboxer and an MMA. And if you're not finishing people, I think people get bored and they lose interest.
Yeah, and she does outboxing a lot too. So her style of fighting doesn't really call for the knockout. But
No,
let's see if she's gonna even do MMA too, right? And depends on the matchmaking they come up with. It could turn out to be interesting, and she could score more knockout in actually MMA. You
well, I
know?
think with smaller gloves, yeah, and people are interested. I'm seeing people say, "Who knows if this happens?" But I'm seeing people say, "Rena goes out there, Rena beats Yamato Miyu. Let's
Mhm.
have Rena fight Panchan Rina in a kickboxing match."
That would be very interesting. Yeah,
The only difference being, I think there's like a 2 or 3 kilo weight difference between them,
right.
but
I don't know if the
still,
Rena
you
is
make
gonna
that
do the
fight.
kickboxing fight, right? So this is gonna be
Yeah.
interesting. You know?
Mhm.
Yeah. We'll see. You know. So
Yeah.
we had a lot to talk about this week again, and well, next week, what will we have next week? We're gonna have a Rising 31.
Deep
Yeah,
and deep.
yeah, and Deep. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. So we're gonna have a
And
lot
is
to
I
talk
think
about.
Kita Oka is also fighting on that deep card.
Mm.
So it's a big weekend.
It's the last question
Oh,
you're gonna have to answer.
before
It says, "Whatever happened to Momo Shimizu, the 12 years old B24? She changed the gym.
well, I've
She
seen her.
left the yeah, she left the Hakushinkai and went to somewhere else.
I've
Uh,
seen her on Facebook though, and she's like talking about fighting again. So I think she's around.
yeah, she's around, and I think they're gonna start booking her fights.
Yeah,
Yeah, and she
'cause I've
is
seen her
actually
talk
high
about it.
school now, so she's getting a little bit bigger, but not
Yeah,
much
man.
taller. Yeah.
Plus, I mean, Deep's got so much. I mean, this last Deep card, like a 17-year-old fought an 18-year-old. So Deep is just completely filled with. And before we close, I will say this
Mhm.
along the women's line over the weekend. Our favorite team, ex former team date,
Oh yeah,
uh,
Nori and what happened again?
Karen.
Nori lost, right, to
Nori
Takahiro.
lost, which isn't a surprise because I heard from what I heard, Nori did well in the first round, but
Mhm.
then Hashi just grappled her for the rest of the fight and won a decision.
Okay, so probably like put her on the ground and yeah,
Yeah, got her on
I
the
did
ground.
see that, right?
But Karen won by first round knockout.
I
She,
read that, yeah.
she cut her opponent, but there's a lot of blood, and they stopped the fight. And Karen is 18, 4-0 now, bunch of finishes. Now, I want to like asterisk this and say the finishes are over people that I generally haven't heard of or I heard of 10 years ago.
Hmm.
But Pancrase is doing a great job of building her up. And I'm excited. I'm all about this crazy team, Pravjra. Like, I can't even pronounce their name. Pravjara, whatever they
Right,
call
right. I can
themselves now.
pronounce that. Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
But
but
who knows? Someday we will see one of those girls in Invicta UFC. Who
yeah,
knows?
exactly right.
Come on,
Yeah.
that'd be very interesting.
So I was speaking to Stuart Fulton, who does the media
Yeah,
work for
yeah.
Pancrase,
Uh-huh.
and he was saying like he was super impressed because he never spoke to them before, and he said these girls are so charismatic that if they can keep winning, they're going to become stars.
Oh, I could see that. And I always say that Nori has the talent. I mean,
Yeah,
they just have to have a right training environment, which I don't think they do.
right.
That's
Well,
the
I've tried
problem.
to ask them about them. You can't get them to give a straight
Yeah,
answer about the
exactly. I would
training.
love to know what kind of training they do. I
Yeah,
really
because
do.
at this point, it just seems like it's almost like they obviously are just like essentially kickboxers,
Hmm.
but you're kind of like, so how would you like to start training at a real gym?
Oh man, I'm telling you, I can't wait for them. I mean, are they like the same as the other team? Like this new team,
They're like,
same as the team date, who does like entertainment gigs and
I think they're solely concentrating on fighting because
really, that's pretty interesting, right?
there's one more of them. There's the guy who fought Kai Asakura, I think, like way back at the Outsiders.
Yeah, I think I heard that. Yeah.
I think his name like used to be Tiger Date, but now he's like Durrani or something like. They have all these like crazy names, but I know that it gives MMA Rising an aneurysm trying to straighten out all the names on the topology reports. But Karen's looking great, and someone like I think WMMA News actually showed that like this is the stuff I like about Japan. They made Kit Kat bars with their pictures on them, and
Mm.
anyone that bought a
Oh
ticket from
yeah, I
them
saw
got
that
Kit Kat.
somewhere. Yeah.
but they didn't call them Kit Kats. They called them Kit Katsus,
Ah,
Kitokatsu, which like means
right,
win.
right. Yeah.
And so, but it's kind of fun to see. Like, plus they're so they just started on social media because I think they're both relatively. Karen especially is pretty young,
Mhm.
but I think they're trying to market themselves. So it's kind of interesting to see the unique approaches they're taking.
No, I'm very interested in that team and also the fighters there.
Yeah, I
Someday
love any.
they produce something interesting. Someone very interesting. Who knows?
I love all the weird stuff that comes out of Japan, and this is a
Yeah.
perfect example of something
Yes,
you'd never see in the U.S.
right. Oh God, somebody should like follow them to make a documentary. I'm telling you.
I just want like a documentary series, like that's just following them, Nakai Rin, and like, maybe one other fighter around.
Exactly right. Someone should finance that project. I mean, they should have some producer out there who has to be interested in that, right?
Just like have some name for it, like the crazy fighters of Japan.
But again, it's going to be very difficult to shoot in Nakai. You're going to have to
No, I mean
convince the
all you have to do is
husband.
ask her about the bugs that she collects and like the crazy posts she has about
But
bugs.
still, just get there to actually shoot,
Yeah,
get her to talk
a
to the front of the camera is going to be hard.
like a 3-hour video of her talking about her love of Beatles.
Yeah,
And
that too.
but
All
yeah,
right.
I wanted to make sure you knew that they fought though. I had to like give you the update.
Yes, definitely. All right. So we'll come back in 2 weeks.
Perfect.
All right.
Try to get some sleep during the daytime while your son's asleep.
I know I have to. Yeah. All right. So we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Perfect.
Have a nice day.
Bye.
All right. Bye bye.